the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Let's go to Mary now in Texas.
I have people asking me all the time, why can't your priest marry? You know, in other religions, pastors, they're all married and all that. I think I know why, but I have a hard time explaining this to people.
Yeah, the first thing to know is that the celibacy, the discipline of celibacy in the Latin Rite of the Catholic Church is not a doctrine. It's not where the church says the teaching is that priests can't get married. Rather, the custom is that priests can't get married. Now, that's the first thing to remember. This is a custom, a discipline. Therefore, unlike a doctrine that can't be changed, this could, in theory, be changed. It could happen that a pope could say, we are now going to permit married men to become priests in the Latin Rite. There are other rites of the Catholic Church in which this is common. So the Eastern rites of the Catholic Church, especially in other countries, you will find married Catholic priests. In the Eastern Orthodox churches, this is also the case. You'll find married Orthodox priests. So knowing that it's a custom and a discipline and that it could change is a way to approach the topic so that you don't think that this is something that could never change. Now, the next thing to know is that Jesus did give a teaching on the issue of consecrated celibacy, which you can read in Matthew chapter 19. So you want to begin reading in verse 1 to get the context. So he's being asked about divorce. And as he describes marriage, he says, have you not read that he who made them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man put asunder. They said to him, why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and to put her away? He said to them, for the hardness of your heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces, now you notice by doing this, Jesus is asserting his authority over Moses. It's a very important point he's making here. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for unchastity and marries another commits adultery. The disciples said to him, if such is the case of a man with his wife, it is not expedient to marry. Some translations say it's better not to marry. But he said to them, not all men can receive this saying. Now this is where we're going to zero in on your question about priestly celibacy. Not all men can receive this saying, but only those to whom it is given. For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men. That's referring to castration. And there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. He who is able to receive this, let him receive it. Some translations say, he to whom this is given should receive it. So in this entire passage here, we see a juxtaposition between marriage and the importance and the beauty of marriage and consecrated celibacy for the sake of the kingdom. And so here in verse 12, Jesus is saying, verse 11 and 12, this is not for everybody, but there are some who are called to this, and those who are called to this to be eunuchs, so to speak. He's using a euphemism. In other words, you're not getting married and you're not fathering children. You don't have a wife. He says there are those who are called to this, and those who are called should accept this call. So that now is the basis for the church's discipline, that men who wish to be priests, they do what Jesus said in Matthew 19, 11 and 12, and they make themselves eunuchs, not in any literal sense, obviously, but they embrace consecrated celibacy, and with it, continence. Continence means no sexual activity. Celibacy means no marriage. A man could be celibate and incontinent, and I'm not talking about adult diapers here. I'm just saying he could be celibate and sexually active, or he could be married and continent, meaning married but no sexual activity. What Jesus is saying here is celibate and continent. So he's giving himself for the sake of the kingdom. Now, that was not a universally applied ideal in the early church, and this is why you can see married deacons, married priests. and even some married bishops for that matter. But over time, in the Latin Rite of the Church, it became clearer that the higher way, the more ideal way to serve the church, if you're going to be ordained a priest, would be to be as much like Jesus as possible. And Jesus was not married. He was universally available to everybody. He didn't clock out at the end of the day. Okay, guys, it's 5 o'clock. I'm going to go home to my wife and kids. That would have been really weird when you think about it, because that would have meant that Jesus, who is Lord and Messiah, is universally available to all of us, except when he's got his private time with his wife and children, and they have a more exclusive, unique kind of relationship. So the church recognized that for the priest especially, this was a way to pattern his ministry after that of Jesus, who was celibate and continent, as was St. Paul. In fact, St. Paul talks about how he says, I wish all of you were single like I am, so you could devote yourself single-mindedly to the kingdom and the things of the kingdom. But he says a married man is divided, and he has to be busy about the things of pleasing his wife and putting food on the table, things of that nature. A married woman cannot be single-minded. She has to be busy about pleasing her husband and doing the things that moms do. And he says, but a single man or a single woman can be single-minded and devote himself or herself entirely to these things. So that's where this custom, this discipline came in. And in my view, it's a very wise discipline. And married men can be ordained priests because matrimony is not an impediment or an obstacle to being ordained to holy orders. But the reverse is not true. So a lot of people, I think, have the mistaken notion that if the church were ever to change this discipline, and I hope it never does, because I think it's a wise discipline, it's part of the solution to the problem, it's not the problem. But if it should ever happen that the church would change this doesn't mean that your local parish priest can go find a girlfriend and get married, because holy orders is an impediment to marriage. So the parish priest would not be allowed to go out and find a wife, but a married man could be a candidate to be ordained a priest. Now, I mentioned a resource. I had a conversation with a married Catholic priest called Celibacy in the Priesthood, and I'll get a link posted on my Twitter feed to that audio after the show. Thanks. Until tomorrow, I'll pray for you. Please pray for me.